Can you dig it? With a Bobcat compact excavator, you can. Up to $6,000 in rebates on select models and 0% financing for 36 months.
Check us out at Bobcat of Charleston in North Charleston.
Hi there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 433 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I am Jason Evans here for your listening enjoyment. I am joined, as I almost always am, by Donald Wine and Sam Klein. Sam, how are you feeling today?
I am doing all right. I am currently visiting friends out on the West Coast, so it is a little earlier in the morning for me, which actually feels like it's hearkening back to our Once Upon a Time days when I recorded in Colorado.
Denver. Yeah,
and you guys would record on the East Coast. So this is actually a pretty familiar feeling for me, which is pretty cool.
And Donald, you're in Washington, right, buddy?
I am in Washington. For people in Washington, Three Stars Brewery, which is a brewery that is local to DC, is closing its doors this weekend. So after I'm done with this, I'm going to spend the afternoon going out to that brewery and reminiscing. Pretty good brewery. Their beers are still available, at least up and down the East Coast. So if you've had the peppercorn saison, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's kind of weird. A lot of DC breweries and distilleries are closing their doors either temporarily or permanently. So everyone start drinking beer and whiskey from the district because we need our people.
we need to tell people to start drinking more in 2022.
Correct.
I didn't realize this was the recommendation, but okay.
Will not fight it. I will not fight that recommendation.
Yeah, exactly. I was doing plenty.
Drink responsibly,
weekend,
but drink more.
I'm with you.
Gentlemen, we have a topic that will drive many of us to drink that we are going to spend most of our time talking about today. It's something that we've avoided. There are a lot of people out there who have said, we need to hear you guys talk about it. On the last podcast, I made it clear, I did a little thing at the beginning of our conversation with the Kelly brothers, where I said, look, we know that the conference realignment is out there and we're not ready to talk about it yet. And I noted that there ain't such thing as sources on this, unless you're talking to the AD, the president of the university, or really important members of the board of trustees. You don't have sources on this. Jon Scheyer, believe it or not, is probably not a source on this. Neither is Mike Elko. So the conference, the topic, of course, is conference realignment. And there was big news almost this week when there was a tweet that went out that caused a lot of people to get into a stir. A gentleman who covers swimming, and we can mock him for being a swim journalist, but in fairness, that at least means he's a journalist. At least he's someone who has some sources, maybe knows some people. He said that Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Virginia were negotiating to join the SEC. Again, those four would be Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Virginia. And for, 12 hours, 16 hours, maybe more than that, there are a lot of people who are like, oh my God, it's about to happen. The ACC is going to be torn apart. And things have faded since then. I think some people have somewhat debunked that notion, but there's no question the conference realignment is a major story that's happening right now. And, it could be, we're recording this at 11 a.m. on Sunday morning. It could be by noon or 1 o'clock that some seismic shift has happened. And it could be that nothing else happens. There are no changes for years to come. No one really knows, but we're going to try and talk about it a little bit and specifically talk about how it connects to Duke and how it relates to Duke, because Duke, I think, is in a weird position. Donald, why don't you get me started on all this? Yeah. Where are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So Jason, before we get into the overall discussion, I do want to point out, yes, we kind of clowned the guy for being a swim journalist who kind of broke this news that had everybody going stir crazy. But I want to remind everybody before we get deep into this conversation that while the discussion of conference realignment centers around football, it affects every single sport that a university may have. So it's not like it's just football people talking about this. Every single sport up and down the line, the revenue sports, the non-revenue sports, the Olympic sports, all of them are talking about how it's going to affect them, because what's missing from some of this talk is the fact that even though, Texas is booming the SEC for football, or USC and UCLA are going to the Big Ten for football, that's going to affect their non-revenue sports as well. It's going to affect the bottom line budgets of some of these universities who may want to move, who may want to be in a position to get more money, but they also have to spend more on the other sports, because they don't get the sponsorships, they don't get the scholarships, they don't get the revenue that football and, in Duke's case, basketball gets. So I want to keep that in mind, that despite the fact this guy may be a swim journalist, let's be clear, swimmers are talking about this too, because it will affect their day-to-day life as well. Now, go ahead,
Donald,
Sam.
can we also clarify? Because I think, Jason, you were setting us up for the discussion about, we jumped right to the Duke discussion, which is we haven't really talked about the USC and UCLA news yet. So as of right now, because of the news from last week with USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, leaving the Pac-12, the two biggest conferences, the two most important conferences when it comes to football, the Big Ten and the SEC, are, as of a couple of years from now, both at 16 members and include, teams from across the country now with a couple of West Coast teams joining the Big Ten and Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. You've got real national reach, basically national reach for those two conferences. And at 16 schools apiece, there's a question about how big could they possibly get, and what does that mean? So that's really the world in which we're talking about what happens to Duke and what happens to the ACC.
And I don't know if you guys want to. I tell you what. Actually, I'm hosting, so I'm going to try and direct us a little bit here, and I want us to get into the specifics, at least right now, of Duke and the ACC. And what I want you to save is your comments about whether you think this is smart and makes sense and all that other kind of stuff. But I just want to talk specifically about Duke and the ACC. And the things we need to address are, number one, folks, if you haven't heard the words grant of rights, this is a huge issue. All the ACC teams a couple years ago, back when there was some other conference realignment stuff happening, and there were some real concerns that the ACC could get raided at that time. All the ACC schools agreed to grant their media rights to the conference through the year 2036. I want to repeat that. 2036. We're still 13, 14 years off from when these grant of media rights expires. And what that means is, if they play a game in any sport that is televised or otherwise broadcast in some way, the ACC owns the revenues from that broadcast. So everyone out there who's Clemson's going to go to the SEC. Wow, can you imagine the Clemson-Alabama game? That'll be Clemson-Georgia game. There's going to be huge ratings games. Yeah, huge ratings games that, under the current grant of rights, the ACC would collect the money from, not the SEC. So the first hurdle for any ACC team that wants to leave the conference is the grant of rights. They have to figure out a way to get out of it, or buy out of it, or whatever else it may be. And then the other thing I want to talk about is Duke, and whether is Duke going to be on the move? What are the scenarios and all that other kind of jazz? Sam, I'll come to you first. And I tell you what, tell me which one you want. You want to talk about whether the ACC is changing or whether Duke's on the move?
I can lay out what I think are the three basic scenarios for Duke as I see them today. And I
love it.
I'm not going to address the grant of rights issue, because to me, I actually think it's less important, because the amount of money that's at stake here for these athletic departments, especially if you think that the SEC and the Big Ten could get up to 20 teams apiece, there's enough money in there that they'd basically be able to pay out their portion of the ACC grant of rights. It might mean that, let's say Clemson's able to leave the conference and make $100 million a year from Big Ten football money, or from SEC football money. Some of that would not go directly to Clemson. It would probably have to go back to the ACC to get themselves out of that deal. So I'm less concerned about
the alternate would be that Clemson says, look, we'll buy our way out of the grant of rights. What's the number?
Exactly.
Is it let's say it's $150 or $200 million. And they go, okay, well, over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, we'll make that amount of money back.
But quickly on that point, right? right now, ACC teams make $36 million a year from the ESPN contract and this grant of rights contract. $36 million a year. They're talking about SEC Big Ten teams and their new contract earning about $100 million. So Clemson or any other team could be like, okay, here's your 36. They're still making out more. They're still getting more money under the new deal than they would by staying in the ACC if this is something that is a big issue with the grant of rights.
So let me put the grant of rights aside for a second and tell you what I think the three basic scenarios are for Duke. And Jason, you said that we're going to hold off on our opinions on which one we like the most or which one makes the most sense. So I'll put that aside. Three scenarios I envision for Duke. The first of which is that Duke is, and let's say that there are probably up to 8 teams or eight schools that are going to get to join these beefed up SEC and Big Ten, because I think they can get to like 20 teams apiece, and they're each at 16 now. Duke, the first scenario is Duke gets to be one of those up to 8 schools. And I think that the other ones that are almost certainly going to go just because of, football eyeballs that they can attract, UNC, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, from the ACC. From the Pac-12, you might be able to get Washington, you might get Oregon, you might get Stanford or Berkeley. I don't know exactly, how many, what the ratings are for each of these programs, but these are the football schools that probably get to move, right?
By the way, you would be shocked at Oregon's football ratings. I mean,
that they're bad or that they're good.
They're great. Like,
so
believe it or not, Oregon is like one of the top 15.
That's not surprising at all. They're on TV every week, national TV.
Oregon might get to, I'm putting aside which of the schools get to be in this next group of 8.
Right.
Let's say Duke gets to be one of them. And let's be clear, Duke is not getting chosen to go to the Big Ten or the SEC on account of its like football reach. It's entirely because of the UNC rivalry and the basketball. Because Duke football is not attracting TV ratings.
100%
we know
agree.
That. And we have to be pretty honest about that when we think about this as Duke fans. So that's scenario one. In that scenario, Duke is really able to spend a lot more on sports. Maybe they go through another Wallace Wade renovation. Maybe they just continue to be a doormat the way that like Vanderbilt is in the SEC every year. I think that would probably be the more likely scenario. But in any case, the Duke athletic department gets to keep growing its revenues along with the top programs. They probably still don't make as much as like Ohio State or Texas makes, but they're basically able to stay the same as they are today. That's the first scenario. The second one is that Duke still leaves the ACC, but they go to the Big 12. And in this scenario, I envision that the Big 12 like becomes the sort of third place conference because it has currently the most of the remaining quote unquote Power 5 program or Power 5 conferences, the ACC, the Big 12 and the Pac-12, all of which are under threat right now. The Big 12, I think, has the best position to be like the winning conference of those, to be like the clear third place. They have, I think, the best remaining football programs in terms of TV reach. Maybe the Pac-12 does, but the Big 12 has sort of better time slots, right? It's easier for an East Coast fan to watch the other to watch Baylor football than it is for East Coast fans to watch Washington football. So in that scenario, the Big 12 is like, all right, let's cobble together kind of the best remaining misfits who missed out on the SEC and the Big Ten, and Duke goes there. In that scenario, Duke has to do a lot of traveling for all of these sports and is probably stretching itself pretty thin in terms of the budget that is sort of incremental to joining that Big 12. The reason that Duke would do it is that they look at the remaining ACC and they say, this ACC grant of rights is actually going to be a negative thing for us because the new television contract that the ACC is going to be able to sign with ESPN or whoever it is going to be worse than the one they have today. That's scenario 2. The third scenario is that Duke either remains in the ACC or in a conference that is made up primarily of schools currently in the ACC. On the East Coast, playing football at a decidedly lower tier, because once you get rid of Miami and Florida State and Clemson and whoever the ACC schools that do get poached, the football is not as good. And Duke is definitely not even eligible to be invited to whatever we call the college football playoff in this scenario. The ACC is like almost certainly not going to be a part of that at the end of all of this realignment. In that scenario, Duke probably has a lot more control of its football schedule, of its basketball schedule, because this new ACC is not that great at basketball either. And Duke probably has to go play a really strong non-conference schedule, similar to the way that like Gonzaga has to schedule today to keep its basketball powerhouse status. The other knock-on effect of staying in this ACC that is really diminished is that Duke is probably making a lot less money and has to make some tough choices about which athletic programs it's going to keep, because it's not going to be able to support the 20 plus programs that are around today with ACC, ESPN football money. Not that they can't make it up. They can go find donors who are going to get that. They can sell more, jerseys that say Paulo Banchero or Derek Whitehead on them, what have you. But I don't know that Duke is able to make up that difference in TV revenue in that scenario.
So to recap, your three scenarios, and I think these are not unreasonable, is that 1, Duke joins one of these super conferences. 2, Duke joins, and you said it's the Big 12, whatever, a sort of lesser conference than the Big 2, but still a significant conference. And whether it is the ACC combining with the Big 12 or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what they. I'm saying I don't know.
We don't need to get into what they call it or what it is.
It's right. Number 3.
Right. It's the third conference, and then the third scenario is Duke is a part of a significantly lesser conference. Essentially, there become 2 or 3 major conferences, and then Duke is in one of the next tier conferences where our primary focus is basketball. We have lesser sports, we have lesser money.
And in that scenario, imagine it being like what the Big East or the AAC became in the last few years, right? We still recognize that like Villanova is a top basketball program that does not play in a power conference. They play in like a decidedly second tier conference. Let's ignore the ACC's recent success at getting teams into the tournament. Let's put that aside. The ACC is still a more prominent basketball conference than the Big East or the AAC are.
Well, I don't. Big East is pretty close, but yeah, I hear you. Donald, so what do you think of Sam's scenarios? Is there another scenario for Duke?
I don't think there's another scenario. I think those are laid
actually out. We should add there is one other scenario. We have to acknowledge it, which is that the SEC and the Big Ten say, okay, we're at 16, we're happy, we don't need to expand anymore, and things stay where they are, which is probably that the ACC is currently the third conference, but clearly below those top 2 and pretty much on par, I think, with the Big 12. I think the Big 12 and the Pac-10 now, Pac-12, whatever, are going to do something to try and strengthen the remaining schools they have.
Yeah. And I think for me, I've been talking with my best friend about this for like the last couple of weeks since the, first domino kind of dropped. And really, there's 2 things that I'm going to point out. I think 1, if Duke goes anywhere, if they leave the ACC, I bet, and I'm not going to say 100% certainty, but my hunch is that they go where UNC goes, that those two will
become a package deal. I agree.
They package themselves together because of the basketball aspect. And if they go to one of these, SEC, Big Ten, they go together. I honestly don't think it would be the SEC, but yeah,
I agree with you. I think if Duke goes anywhere, it will be the Big Ten.
Right. The other thing is this: there's one huge domino that everyone is waiting to see where it's going to fall, and that's Notre Dame. Because if Notre Dame leaves the ACC in every other sport but football to join Big Ten in everything, including football, that means that the ACC contract already is gone. Like whatever contract that they have is going to be weaker the next time around. And anything that the Big Ten has is going to be that much stronger because they're going to have NBC and ESPN and Fox all bidding for them and offering probably, upwards of $100 million per school per year. That is going to be the big domino, because once that happens, then the Big Ten has 17 teams. And they're going to have to try and figure out a way to either get to 18 or to get to 20. And that's when people will start jockeying for position. The SEC will counter by trying to increase to that amount of whatever amount the Big Ten says as well. And there's going to be an all out, just bidding war, essentially. Everyone kind of offering themselves for these other conferences to see what the best deal is going to be, who the best teams are going to be. And I think that is where I think Duke hopefully is ahead of the game in that. I think they're keeping in, knowing how Duke has kind of been in the head of game in everything with regarding NIL, with regarding, all of these little things that people think are little things. Those details are going to hopefully work out in the end where we end up in the best position possible, whether that is here in the ACC or in another conference. But I think the biggest thing is if Notre Dame makes a decision one way or the other, that is going to determine how the rest of this conference realignment goes, because there's such a big piece. Because once this happens, I think there's talk about like maybe us going independent in football and then joining like the Big East or something like that in basketball. I think that is an option, but I don't like the option because, as Sam alluded to, I think the new contract with the college football playoff is going to make it where those big teams shut the rest of everybody else out. And Duke wants to be at that table. Duke has always been at that table, whether it's been through the ACC or for football or for, basketball. They've always been at that big table. They don't want to be at the little table when this new one comes around. And I think if Notre Dame is forced to join a conference, because I think that's what this is setting up to be, the Big Ten and the SEC are going to say, hey, if you're not in the conference, you're not a part of this table. Notre Dame joins the Big Ten. That means everyone else is going to try and get at that big table and try to join one of those two conferences.
Guys, I got a key question for you. What do you want? If you could do anything, what would you want Duke to do? And while you guys think about your answer, I will tell you that I am very hesitant about saying I want Duke to be part of one of these two super conferences that are coming into play. I mean, if I could really wave my magic wand, I would say, hey, the ACC is the third biggest. We're not quite as competitive as those two, but we're clearly number 3, and things stay where they are right now. And Duke continues to play teams where we're driving distance. Fans are driving distance from most of the games. Syracuse, BC, I get it. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to get to the games, and they're all in the same time zone and everything like that. That's my preference. I just don't know if that's possible. So, Sam, what do you want Duke to do? If you could,
Jason,
yeah.
I would say actually that Duke playing Syracuse and BC is actually currently advantageous in that a lot of Duke fans and Duke alumni live in the Northeast.
True.
So,
right.
It's
not driving distance for them. It may be
right, exactly.
Like for Duke, but not for us.
Replace Pittsburgh with St. John's, and you've got a much better conference. Like if Duke was in the old Big East, like if Duke could make a conference out of like St. John's and Georgetown and Georgia Tech, and
Villanova,
line of schools, like there's your geographic footprint for the Duke fans. And maybe they have to add like University of San Francisco or something so that they can throw a bone to the West Coast. Like that would be the best way to get Duke fans to the games. Jason, I'm with you in my sort of hesitation about what version of the future I want for Duke. Duke makes the most money and sort of remains the Duke athletic department sort of remains the most as it is today by being in that scenario where they join the Big Ten or the SEC. And I think I'm less sort of committed, I think, than the two of you to if Duke is joining one of these conferences, it must be the Big Ten and not the SEC. I think that personally, I think that the academic part of this has been tossed out the window, and it's really just about, who's getting the television contract. Geographically, I guess Duke fits more in the SEC than they do in the Big Ten. And so I actually wouldn't be surprised if Duke is joining one of those big conferences. I wouldn't be surprised by either of them. But I look at what has happened to the Maryland athletic department since they left the ACC for the Big Ten, and I see how they're definitely struggling to compete in football. They're still pretty competitive in basketball. Like they've been ranked in the top 25, but they're not. It's not like they're winning the Big Ten every year, right?
No.
Michigan State,
and they're not challenging for the Big Ten either.
Yeah.
Ohio State, Wisconsin. There are tons of good basketball programs in the Big Ten, which means that Maryland is still jockeying for a position and is possibly like worse off than they were in the ACC, because the last few years in the ACC, they had the Grievous Vasquez teams that were very competitive. Of course, before that, they were nationally competitive in the Steve Blake, Juan Dixon years. That really hasn't been the case for Maryland. And I look at that outcome for Maryland, and that was also driven by money. They admitted it when they moved.
Oh, yeah.
They were like, we need to keep all these programs afloat. And I I don't think that the enthusiasm is there anymore for Maryland athletics. Donald can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think if Duke joins the Big Ten, they become like Maryland. They're an afterthought in a conference where the center of mass is much farther away from where Duke is, and yeah, maybe they get to keep all this money and keep running the programs, but now they're playing harder games every week, and maybe the basketball program is able to keep up because it's Duke, but it's swimming in a much bigger pond, and I don't actually know if Duke fans are going to like losing more in that scenario, right?
Hey,
the fun, I think the fun is in the winning.
You hit on something. The teams that have moved conferences in recent years have really, like Texas A&M. Hey, they're making a lot more money in the SEC.
Are they winning the SEC?
Exactly. That football program was a lot more relevant when it was in the Big 12 than it has been in the SEC. They've been competitive some years. They've had some glory, but competing with LSU, and Florida, A&M, Georgia, and Alabama.
Texas A&M and Maryland both went and joined extremely competitive football divisions, right? Texas A&M's in that SEC West. Maryland's in that Big Ten East that has has Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan State. So they're going up against a lot. So I would like that scenario only because it helps Duke sort of preserve what it's got. And I think that I'll skip ahead to say that the scenario that I prefer is the third one that I laid out, where Duke is in either it's still called the ACC or it's called the Big East. It's called something made up of a bunch of schools that still play football but are more basketball focused. The downside to that, the part that's going to hurt the most, is that Duke is going to have to close some of its programs, or is going to be like much less relevant nationally in a lot of programs where we're used to being competitive. And I don't know among those if that's men's and women's lacrosse, women's golf, men's and women's soccer, the softball, and the new softball program, the baseball program that's recently been rejuvenated. Duke has had a lot of on-field, on-court type success in a lot of these programs over the years. And I don't know that all of them survive or at least survive at a really competitive Duke level in that scenario. But the reason that I like it the most is that it kind of has Duke admitting that it's not a power football program. And I love Duke football. We love Duke football. We don't talk about it as much on the show, but I'm watching Duke football every week, and I know that only 7,000 people show up to the games, and I know that the TV ratings are garbage. And as nice as 30,000 seat Wallace Wade Stadium is, and it is really nice now. If you haven't been to a Duke football game in recent years, you should go, because the game day experience is actually really pleasant. But it is not an Ohio State football game. It's not an Iowa football game. It's not a Purdue football game. It's not as
it's not a South Carolina football game. It's not a Georgia football game.
Definitely
it's not a
not
Bama football game.
Definitely
Right? Like
not. It's definitely none of those things. So there is a level of looking yourself in the mirror here that I think Duke would benefit from by being in that scenario, even if it means less money. By the way, if you're worried about any of this affecting basketball, because I feel like we haven't talked about the effect on basketball.
Oh, we're about to get
very
there.
much here.
I was going to talk about it.
I don't think. Yeah, Donald, maybe you can take this from me, but I don't think this changes much for basketball. Duke is a really strong basketball program that is able to schedule any game that it really wants to schedule. And if all you've been complaining about for the last few years is the fact that Duke schedules a crap non-conference schedule or could schedule a better non-conference schedule, hold on to your butts, because in a world where Duke doesn't play in a great conference, they are going to schedule awesome non-conference basketball games.
So for me,
hey, Donald, really quick, in addition to talking about the basketball impact, which I'm eager to hear you talk about, I want to know which one of Sam's scenarios, which I think are pretty reasonable scenarios, you prefer for Duke.
So my scenario is this: Duke is in the best possible conference they can be in. And I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but it isn't. Here's why. Like I said, Duke has always been at the big table. I don't want Duke to resign itself to being at the little table, because there's a lot. All the money that we've pumped into the basketball program, the football program, the lacrosse program, the golf program, the softball. We created a softball program.
They built a new softball program.
Program.
And they won the ACC.
Yeah. and when the ACC and has done well they were in the super regionals of the NCAA tournament, the College World Series, like baseball rejuvenated, tennis rejuvenated, like all these different sports. I don't want to go back to the thing where some of those programs have to be let go, especially after all of the money that all these capital campaigns that Duke has been doing over the last decade to pump money into those non-revenue sports. I don't want that to go to waste. But here's the other thing. I think here's the difference between us and a team like, say, Maryland, or even Texas A&M or West Virginia, or any of those other schools that kind of Missouri. We don't have to worry about rivalries ever. Maryland, when they left the Big Ten, they left their only rival that they considered to be a rival, and that was us. And they thought by going to the Big Ten, they'd still be able to schedule us. They'd still be able to keep that rivalry and get more money. And that hasn't happened, right? Not even a little bit. And throughout the ACC Big Ten Challenge, they are terrible at basketball. And they always say, why don't we get Duke in the ACC Big Ten Challenge? It's because you're terrible at basketball. They're
and
not
maybe
good.
if you believe the conspiracy theories, it's because Coach K has his thumb on the scale. But Coach K is retired now, so that's in the past.
And you know who we got? Ohio State. Why? Because Maryland is terrible, is not good at basketball. But here's the other thing, too. When Maryland joined the Big Ten back in 2014, I believe is what it was, right? Every single game that they had in football and in basketball, their fans basically tried to make a rivalry out of it. They were like, yo, we about to smoke Rutgers. Like, Rutgers doesn't know what's coming. We're about to smoke Penn State. We're going to go in there. We're going to trample on their midfield, and they're going to be mad at us, and we're going to get an instant rivalry out of it. And the Big Ten was like, don't care. Do not care about you. But I'll tell you this. Duke basketball steps into a Big Ten arena. Duke basketball steps into an SEC arena. We don't have to worry about that because everyone is always out to beat us in every single sport and every single thing we do. It does not matter if it's basketball. Does not matter if it's football. Does not matter if it's golf. People thrive on the fact that Duke did something to them back in 1973, and they're going to take it out on us when we step foot on their court again. Like, that's what's going to happen. So we don't have to worry about that aspect of it. So we don't have to feel like we're going to be irrelevant in the conference, because we're not. We are going to walk in and people are going to want to beat us. And that is part of making relevance, right? Like, that's how rivalries are created. It's because teams want to beat each other. But we also are going to walk into some of these scenarios where we will have some natural rivals. Look, I'm from Michigan. Dare I say it? Michigan and Duke, a nice rivalry. Michigan State, Duke, a rivalry. I hate Ohio State. I love beating them every year. I hate when we lose to them. Don't disappoint me on my 40th birthday, Duke. But those sort of things, right? But we also are going to have UCLA, a traditional power in college basketball. If we go to the SEC, we get barbecue every year, Duke versus Kentucky, right? Like that, they're still going to have rivalries for us to be relevant in these conferences. Will we win every year? No, but that's the point. The point is to challenge ourselves and to be at the big table, to get the big dollars so that we can continue to improve our resources. And that's what I think we should do, whether that's the Big Ten, whether that's the SEC, whether that's, some conglomerate conference that's going to compete with those two conferences. I want us to be in the best position possible to maintain our sports and also to continue to pump resources, to continue to maintain level, and for us to always be ahead of the game like we have been for the last decade in every other aspect of this thing we call athletics, right? College athletics, with the NIL, with just, bringing in Rachel Baker to kind of be a general manager of the basketball team program. Like, those sort of things are teams that are things that other programs are not thinking about. I want us to always have the ability to do that.
Even though, Donald, in your scenario, Duke is going to get trampled in football more than it currently does.
But just maybe that spawns more resources be pumped into the team, more emphasis on recruiting, more emphasis. I mean, I'm not going to, diss the coaching because we haven't seen them coach a game yet, but like more emphasis on those sort of things. Yeah, maybe we turn into an SEC school that every 2 years we fire the coach because we went 6-5. But we as Duke fans are actually very, grateful when we get to bowl games. We don't take those for granted. We draw more than any other team because when we go to a bowl game, even in this last decade, it's still a novelty for us. I want that. And we've always, I think all three of us have always said, we want that novelty to eventually wear off because we're in so many bowl games that we don't have to worry, like that we're still like, confused. Right. So I want it to be where that, rising tide lifts all ships. And that ship is football. I think that's the thing that's the reason why we're kind of in this conundrum is because football, the program relative to basketball is so disparate compared to the other schools that we have to talk about it from a basketball perspective.
And I'll say this about football. If the scenario where Duke joins one of these two super conferences is a scenario where there are 20 teams in each one of these conferences, and those 40 teams are perceived as the top 40 football teams in the country. In my opinion, that is going to be indisputable. And as a result, Duke could be the worst of those teams. They would still be considered one of the 40 best football teams in the country, and that would help Duke in recruiting. We are not currently considered one of the 40 best football teams in the country. Mike Elko is doing a great job, and his recruiting has so far been off the charts. And I'm eager to see what it does over the next couple of years. It won't happen this year. Obviously, the recruiting is really a few years down the road. That's how it works in football. But if you put Duke in one of these big conferences, I think our football program elevates, not necessarily relative to the SEC, to the rest of those programs, but we elevate relative to the rest of college football. And I think that could be a fun, interesting thing for Duke.
And we can also fish in the same pond. We will have no qualms at being able to fish the same pond. Like right now, we're going to California and we're like, hey, everyone who doesn't want to go to USC, UCLA, Bama, Georgia, Stanford, Cal, Washington, Oregon,
Arizona, Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State.
Right. But at the same time, we can go and say, hey, you want to get the biz exposure. You're in the insert, super conference. We're in that too. So you don't have to go to Alabama or go to Michigan or go to Ohio State to get that exposure. You can get that exposure with us too. You're going to get the same items.
That scenario is the one that I like. I think I'd be cool with it, even though it would feel kind of goofy. The scenario where Duke joins something like a reconstituted Big 12 with, adding like Boise State and BYU and like other football powerhouses from the West Coast or from the western half of the US. That's the one that I'm sort of least interested in. And I worry that's the one I'm like sort of most worried about happening for Duke, is that they get desperate to say, we want to be in that third tier, that number 3 football conference, and that they do that. And it results in like insanely stupid rivalries that don't even really take off. So I hear you on that. And I'm sympathetic to the world where, Duke joins the Big Ten or the SEC, is a laughingstock in football, but still gets to, keep all of its financial muscle to keep all the other programs afloat. Jason, I had a question that I wanted to throw back to you, because one of the interesting layers on this that doesn't get into the national discussion because it's entirely about basketball for Duke is that at the moment, Duke is considered maybe the top basketball program. If it's not the top basketball program, it's one of like the 3 most prominent programs in college basketball. A lot of that is on the coattails of Coach K. Coach K is retired now. Jon Scheyer is the coach. How does that change affect your thinking about sort of when Duke needs to make its move here? Because I think there's an uncertainty about, is Jon Scheyer going to succeed as the Duke coach? And do we want to wait 3 or 4 years before Duke makes this jump? Because I don't know that Duke's stature as a big basketball program is going to fall in 3 years. The recruiting is good. Like the floor is still pretty high for Jon Scheyer, but there's a world where he doesn't succeed. And Duke ends up like Indiana over the last 15 years or UCLA over the last 10 years. Schools that definitely were national powerhouses in basketball that are not any longer.
I think one of the reasons that perhaps you don't see the SEC and the Big Ten moving on the ACC yet is partially that question of what happens to the Duke program. Because if Coach K was still there and it still looked like he was going to be there, long-term, as long as you can at his age, then I think Duke looks more attractive. I think there have been a number of articles, I think we've all read them, that say there is some hesitation regarding the future of the Duke basketball program, and Duke being the absolute, no question about it, number 1 program in the sport, which they are today. And I'm not just measuring that about on-court success. Like the Duke social media influence, imprint, whatever you want to call it, impressions is off the charts.
The TV ratings, everything.
Yes. But I mean, like Duke, and if it's a function of a lot of different things, and not least among them the fact that Duke has all the best young stars in the NBA. But Duke is the big boy in the sport right now, in the sport of college basketball. But yeah, there's a question, and I think it really would behoove Duke for Jon Scheyer to have a really good first year, and for Jon Scheyer to continue to bring in the top tier recruits. I actually think the recruiting may be the most important part of this, because it funnels immediately into the NBA. And one of the reasons Duke is considered the biggest, baddest brand out there in college basketball is because of Zion Williamson and Jason Tatum and Kyrie Irving and all the other guys that we have who are absolute studs in the NBA. And as Duke continues to produce those guys, and we're not going to talk about it in this podcast, but so far, the first couple games in the summer league, Paulo Banchero,
Balling.
Paulo looks unbelievable. And Wendell Moore looked really good as well.
Balling.
But yeah, as Jon Scheyer continues to bring in guys who are future high lottery picks, future NBA All-Stars, that's a big deal for the Duke brand at the college level. And so I think, and Scheyer's shown that he's going to do that, but I think the next couple of years are unbelievably important. And the last thing I'll add to it really quickly, and by the way, those years are important, again, for recruiting, but also for some on-court success. I think Hubert Davis did Jon Scheyer no favors at all last year, making the championship game. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Jon Scheyer to lead this young and new Duke team. And boy, is it new. Shout out Jeremy Roach as the only guy who got meaningful minutes last year who's back. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Jon Scheyer to have this team be very successful on the floor, and for the TV ratings to continue to be strong, and for everyone to say our game against Duke is the biggest game of the year. Because if that starts to slip at all, then Duke's attractiveness to these other conferences just tanks.
I think for me, I'm not as concerned about that. Here's why. Those articles that we've seen about, questioning the future of Duke's program, those have been in the drafts for 30 years. They've been able to break them out, right? The only reason we're having these drafts is because Coach K retired, right? The only reason we're having these articles is Coach K retired for the first time in 42 years. Someone can say, what's the Duke program going to do? How is it going to proceed? But at the end of the day, I think also because of that, the bar for Duke is so high, right? You just mentioned it, Jason. Is it a failure next year if we get to the Final Four again, but don't get to the title game because Hubert Davis got to the title game a year ago? For us, we'd say no, but for everyone else, they're going to say yes. And
no, I don't think so. I don't think so. The question for me would be let's say Duke made the Final Eight. Let's say they were, a top 10 team all year and made the Final Eight, or maybe even only the Sweet 16. Are people going to say, oh, Jon Scheyer can't get it done?
No. Here's the thing. Yes, they will. They're all wrong, right? I wasn't alive when Coach K was hired, but if we had Coach K starting now, Coach K would not be Coach K because he would have been fired, right? But the bar for Duke has already been set so high. So I'm not worried about people thinking we're going to fail if we don't reach that highest bar that not even their program can achieve. I'm not worried about that. For me, it's about, can he continue to bring in good recruits? Can he continue to find success in the ways we do? We can still win ACC championships. We can still win ACC tournaments. We can still get to the Final Four. We can still get to Sweet 16s. That's still going to keep your program in that relevant era. But at the same time, yes, eventually they're going to start the comparisons, but it's not going to be in year one. And I'm not worried about, or year two. I'm not going to necessarily worry about that, but the bar is so high for him that I'm not concerned what anyone else has to think. He just has to put blinders on and quote unquote run his race. This Duke team, we're going to be fine. I think the reason why the hesitation has come around for Duke joining another program has never been because of basketball. It's always been because of football.
All right, last thing on this conference stuff before we take a break. I'm going to say this. My prediction is that nothing's going to happen. My prediction is that the SEC and the Big Ten are both at 16, and they're going to be perfectly content to stay there for a little bit and see what 16 is like. Because, by the way, it's a lot of teams spread over a lot of the country. Scheduling is kind of weird. People are like, oh, what's going to happen when USC goes to play Rutgers? That's strange. Well, USC may not play Rutgers very often because you can't play that many conference games, that many football conference games in a given year. I think that things are going to stay somewhat pat. There'll be some movement. The Big 12 and the Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever it is, are going to do some stuff to try and strengthen themselves, perhaps form a partnership. But I don't think you're going to see the ACC breaking up and all this craziness that we've been discussing as potential stuff. In terms of Duke, my bet is that Duke is continuing to be in a conference with pretty much the same teams, that maybe one or two leave and maybe one or two come for the foreseeable, for the next several years at least. And last thing is, like, the notion that the women's field hockey team from USC is going to go play Minnesota. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. College sports is great because of the rivalries, because of the tradition. You know, think back on the games that you remember from years past for Duke basketball. I'm not talking about NCAA tournament games, regular season games. They are almost universally a game against a UNC or a Virginia, a key conference rival. And part of that is that we mostly play conference teams. But part of that is that we just have so much history, tradition, and we know these teams so well. And when you start to lose that, when you go to 16, when you go to 20 teams in a conference or more, there's talk they could go to 24, you know, whatever it may be, you're going to lose some of that. It doesn't make any sense. And I just think these guys are really short-sighted. I think that they see the money today and they don't realize that money today is not going to be there tomorrow, because people just aren't going to be as interested as they used to be.
I'm not going to make a bunch of predictions, but I'm going to make one simple one. Notre Dame will be forced to cook or get out the kitchen. Period. When it comes to football, they're going to basically say, hey, you either in or you're out. And I think this is setting up for college football playoff to be conferences only and no independents. And they're going to say, hey, if you're going to talk about Notre Dame either has to join a conference or they're going to be on the outside looking in. And that's going to force that other domino, that biggest domino, to drop.
Jason, one thing I'd add to your scenario prediction here, which I guess I could make another scenario in my list, which is things relatively stay pat and the SEC and the Big Ten don't expand very much, is that the only programs that they've added in the last few months, years, whatever, have been USC, UCLA, Texas, and Oklahoma. These are the schools. These are the schools that are moving, right? Even if it's like, oh, we need to get to 20, so we're going to add UNC. UNC does not add the football eyeballs that any of those programs do. So UCLA maybe less so, but it could have been that USC was like, we're taking UCLA with us because this is just how it works. So it might be that all they're doing is gearing up to get the biggest programs possible to position themselves for their new media deals, which are both coming up in the next couple of years. And how much does like Clemson add to your per school football revenue in 2026? I don't know. So you might have a really good point here about how things may stay more the same than we think, given how much they've changed in the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, Sam, that's a great point. There's no question that the moves that have happened, Texas, Oklahoma, USC, and UCLA, enhance the Big Ten and the SEC and bring more money to all the teams in the conference. I am not sure there's any other program, maybe Clemson, but I'm not sure there's any other program that definitively adds revenue to every team in those conferences if they add them.
That's where Donald's point about Notre Dame comes.
Well, right.
Notre Dame is like,
Notre Dame's
the only one left out of those. So,
but I'm not sure there's any deal that nets Notre Dame more than Notre Dame gets from their current TV deal, exclusive TV deal with NBC. But
it's how much they care about the playoff. That's I think that Donald put that really succinctly. So we'll see.
Okay. All right. Well, like I said, we don't have sources. We're just talking randomly. And boy, we talked for a while about that. But believe it or not, we got more stuff to say. Coming up after this break, what are we listening to? Stay with us. Okay, gentlemen, we are back from the break. We're just going to do a quick segment here. What are you listening to? I think all three of us have in the past few days commented to each other. We have our own little private chit chats. We've commented about something that we were listening to that really impressed us, that we thought would be interesting to share with the audience. Donald, I will go to you first. What is it that you've heard recently that you're like, wow, everybody needs to listen to this?
Well, first off, this is just the latest in a line of great, just videos that have come out from this person. And it's Kara Lawson, the head coach of the Duke women's basketball team. If you have not been following Kara Lawson on Twitter, if you've not been following Duke women's basketball on Twitter, one, you should, because their program is on the rise, and they have been recruiting very heavily and bringing some great players into that program over the last year. But also because she gives some pep talks that will get your day, week, or year started or restarted. Whatever if you need a reboot, you need to listen to Kara Lawson. Her latest one is no exception. Her latest one, she talks basically about how people go through life trying to say, oh, well, I can't wait for this to happen because it'll be easier at that point. I can't wait for Friday because the weekend will be easy. I can't wait for the end of the summer because my workload will be light and it'll be easier. And she instead says, don't wait for things to be easy. Work so you can handle the hard better. And I think that was a great, just thing to say, not just to players, but I'm glad that they recorded it and put it out, because it hit me too, right? Like, we're always waiting for, man, I can't, if I can get through this day, like the rest of the week will be pretty easy, or, or a lighter workload or lighter in life, the work balance will kind of like rearrange itself. But life isn't easy. We've all experienced hardships in life. We've all experienced a lot of, good and bad things, the ups and downs, the hills and valleys of life. And never have they been put to you to make it easier. They've always been there so that you can handle hard better. It's how you go off to college and you get an education at a top university. Has it been easier for you since you graduated from Duke? It hasn't been for me. It's been just as hard, maybe harder, but Duke taught me how to make my heart, like, work hard, do that and handle it better, handle the adversity a little bit better. And every single time adversity hits you, it's a lesson that you can take, and next time it happens, you can handle it better. And I think that was very good. So if everyone goes to, I know it was on Duke women's basketball Twitter, I think it's on Kara Lawson's as well. Go check that video out. It's about a 2-minute video. It won't take too long, but it will really shape how you think about life and how you approach life. And when the chips are down and you're having a rough day, it's setting you up so that you can handle the hard better. And I think that was a very good message from Kara Lawson.
I watched that video a couple times, Donald, and I was thinking to myself, man, I wish that someone had told me this a few years ago.
Right.
Because I can look back on a few moments in my life when I probably need someone to say, pick yourself up. It just gets harder from here.
Yeah. And this is a life lesson. And, we are all, very far out of college, Sam, a little more recent than us, but like, we're still learning. And I'm glad that we have a woman like Kara Lawson, who was a member of our Duke family, who can teach us these lessons, ever so often to keep us grounded. Because again, the learning never stops when you leave Duke. The hard never stops. But that message right there, it was also on a Tuesday. It was right after a 4th of July holiday where you're like, I have such a hard week. And she put it right in me at 7 a.m. that, nope, you're going to handle this better. You're just going to handle the hard better. That was a great lesson. Thank you very much for that lesson, Kara.
Yeah. Don't wait for the easy, get better at the hard is like, just it is words to live by. It's great stuff from Kara Lawson. All right, Sam, your turn. What have you been listening to lately?
Yeah, I got to listen to JJ Redick's interview with Grant Hill on JJ's podcast this week. And I don't think I need to tell a bunch of Duke fans that it's interesting to hear a conversation between JJ Redick and Grant Hill. But there were a lot of pretty cool nuggets about Grant's time at Duke, and also about how difficult his struggles were in the NBA with all the injuries. There were, if you remember, there were years where Grant Hill was not able to play and went through a ton of uncertainty about what his role was going to be in the NBA, where his career was going to finish up when he was recovering from all those brutal injuries, and did eventually have a final act in the NBA that was not, it wasn't Hall of Fame worthy the way that his first act in the NBA was, but where he was a big contributor to a couple of really good teams, particularly on the Suns, late in his career. So I just wanted to shout out that conversation. There's all kinds of great stuff about Coach K and the impact that he had on both Grant and JJ, and how the Duke program has sort of continued to lift Grant up. And I think, there are a lot of really impressive guys who have come through the Duke men's basketball program. We talk about Shane Battier a lot on this show. Grant Hill's had an incredible sort of post-NBA player career as an owner, as a broadcaster, as a businessman, as a sports documentary producer. He's done all kinds of cool stuff, and he also stays pretty involved at Duke with a lot of programming there. So it was a neat conversation, and I think that even if folks don't listen to every episode of JJ's podcast, I think that skipping ahead to the Grant Hill one from last week is worth your time.
Okay, it's my turn, and I was a little surprised at my pick of what I've been listening to that I think people should check out. The Bald Men on Campus podcast, which is Jay Billis, Seth Greenberg, and LaFonso Ellis. I love Jay. He's a friend of the podcast, and those guys are all smart, but their podcast usually sucks. I'm just going to be honest. It's usually just not that good, and the audio quality is almost, considering it is an ESPN product, the audio quality is just bad. But recently, LaFonso couldn't be there, and so Jay Billis and Seth Greenberg sat down and talked with Jon Scheyer, and it wasn't like the greatest interview I've ever heard, but I think it was very insightful and very interesting. And we've talked already on this podcast about the pressure on Jon Scheyer and how Duke is at a unbelievable inflection point in our basketball program, because we have a new guy at the helm, first time in more than 4 decades. And so I'm trying to consume everything I can about what Jon Scheyer is thinking, what he's doing, what led him to this moment. And I thought it was a really good, really interesting interview, and I think folks should check it out. Scheyer, one of the interesting things that I heard in it was Scheyer talked about the fact that he has to educate the current Duke team about Duke history, what it means to be a Blue Devil. It sort of spawned out of a playful question as to whether the guys on the program know who Jay Billis is. And Scheyer was like, look, in some cases I got to explain to these guys, here's where Coach K got his start. Here's who Johnny Dawkins and Jay Billis and Danny Ferry are. Heck, here's who Bobby Hurley and Christian Laettner and Grant Hill are. And he said that he shows film. He shows the players old film. And then he really tries to educate the current youngsters, the 17 and 18-year-olds, about the history of Duke basketball. I thought that was, and it's one of the first things they do when these guys arrive on campus. And I thought that was interesting. I also love, there are a couple stories I wanted to highlight. He mentioned that he likes to play tennis with Emil Jefferson, and that he and Emil have pretty similar abilities in tennis. And they recently found out that Mike Schrage and Jay Lucas both also play tennis. And so they're like, oh, let's get together, the 4 of us. We can play a little doubles. And he said, Mike and Jay are really good. And that they played doubles. And apparently Mike and Jay just wiped the floor with John and Emil. I thought that was amusing. And then the last story, yeah.
Hang on,
Sam.
Jason. Can I just very quickly? I'm imagining what it looks like for 6'8" Emil Jefferson and what was once
6'10",
6'10" Jay Billis to be playing tennis, and it's a very limbs-laden affair.
Wait. Sorry, did I say Jay? It was Jay Lucas.
Yeah, I know, but I'm imagining Jay Billis and Emil Jefferson playing tennis. They got a lot in baseball pitcher parlance. I think they would say those guys got a lot of moving parts when it comes to their tennis game.
Okay. So anyway, the last story that Scheyer relayed that I thought was really interesting. So he talked about growing up, and this is who Jon Scheyer was, that when he first became a college basketball fan, he's like, he was a Duke fan. And then he got to like junior high, and everyone who played basketball was now he grew up in Illinois. Everyone was either a fan of Duke or Illinois. And he was like, no, I'm going to be different from all these other guys. And for a little while, he became a fan of Seton Hall back when Tommy Amaker was the coach at Seton Hall. And Jon Scheyer was like, yeah, I was a big Seton Hall fan. And he said, then there was a moment fairly, like his sophomore year or so in high school, where he got a phone call from Coach K, saying like, hey, we're interested in seeing if maybe you want to play for Duke someday. And Jon Scheyer was like, from that moment on, I was the world's biggest Duke fan. He was like, that phone call from Coach K, I was like, Seton who? Seton Hall what? No, I am a Duke fan again. But I thought it was just, like I said, this interview that Jay Billis and Seth Greenberg of ESPN did with Jon Scheyer had a lot of fun stuff in it and a lot of revealing stuff about who Jon Scheyer is.
I do like the fact that he is starting off by talking about Duke history to these young players. And honestly, I think that should be done every year. It doesn't matter if there is a veteran-laden team or an inexperienced team. That's part of going to college, right? Like, I didn't know about all the Duke history when I got to Duke, because not everyone grows up a Duke fan, right? You just mentioned that Jon Scheyer, it was until his sophomore year, he got a fabled phone call that made him a Duke fan, right? Like, for me, it was when Shane Battier committed to Duke and went to Duke. That's when I became a Duke fan, because I wanted to follow my guy, right? Like, but some of these guys didn't grow up as Duke fans. They don't understand why being a Blue Devil is so important, what they're about to experience, how, all the stuff that we talk about with people and how they treat Duke fans or Duke players on the road and stuff like that. They are not necessarily always ready for that. And I like that they start off the campaign by saying, this is what you want. This is how it's going to be. This is what being a Blue Devil is like. Look at these names on the wall. These are the guys that are going to be looking at you to carry their mantle with you, right? Like, that's part of it. And I'm glad that he's doing that.
All right, so that's going to wrap it up for us here on episode 433 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Donald and Sam, thanks for joining me, Jason, as we tried to figure out this conference realignment stuff. I think we got it all solved, right? It's all done. Yeah. There's
so Duke's going to the American, I think, now. Is that right?
Duke is starting its own conference, and it's going to be the Duke Conference, and everyone else will come to us. No,
I don't know. West? Duke's in the Mountain West?
Sun Belt. It's a Sun Belt.
Sun Belt.
As long as we're not in the MEAC, I'm fine with
Duke's in the MEAC.
All right. Like I said, we are wrapping it up here. Hey, folks, don't forget, you can always send us email. We've gotten some fun ones recently. We got people asking us random questions like, hey, where can I get a Duke jersey? Those are the good stuff. We love it. Send us your email at dbrpodcast@gmail.com. dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe so everyone is able to find this podcast, the Duke Basketball Report. I am Jason. He is Donald. He is Sam. And this is the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.
So we have a Duke softball, alumni softball team here in DC. So we played on Friday, and I'm the pitcher, and went through the whole game. We were, battling back and forth. I struck out 4 people, which in softball is very hard to do.
Is it fast pitch, modified?
No,
fast
slow pitch.
Slow pitch. You struck out 4 people in slow pitch softball.
Yeah.
But were you playing against 8-year-olds? I mean, come on, man.
No, I paint that strike zone, man. Wow. But the one walk I had, of course, was in the last inning. We're up 1 run. Walk the first batter. The next guy is the pitcher, and he dinks it to center field. And my center fielder, who was great all game, went to dive for it and just missed. Inside the park.
Everybody's running.
Everybody's running. Everybody scores. We walk off. Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm like, yo, that happened. He's like, he was so mad. I was like, look, that happens. I mean, you win for it. Can't be mad. It's softball. Can't be mad at it.
Crazy things happen in slow pitch softball.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was like one of those things where he didn't hit it that hard, but once it hit the ground, it skidded. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it took off. And no one was able to get it. So
I'm having a great season at the plate. I'm batting close to 800.
I haven't played that much this summer because I'm on 2 teams. The Duke team I've been missing a lot because they're on weekends for the most part, and I'm not here on weekends. And the other team, every Thursday, we either don't have enough players or the other team doesn't have enough players. So we've only played 1 game this season. So yeah, it's been my pitching is on point. My defense is on point. My batting is a little shaky because I bat once every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That doesn't help.
So I play in a synagogue softball league, and I play in the B league. So the quality of the opponents varies wildly.
So it's pretty competitive.
It's probably most competitive softball in Atlanta.
Oh, it is not. It is not. The A League is really competitive. I used to play in the A League. The A League's really competitive. The B League is really not competitive. Although every so often, like today, the team we played, their second baseman was 17 years old and plays high school baseball. I was like, what is this guy doing on the same field with me?
We'll see. We have rules, right? Because like it's an alumni league, and because there's other teams that like to cheat and all that stuff. We all have these stupid little rules. So like we have rules against like you can have one varsity player on your team. You can have you can't have any pros on your team unless they're 50 or over, which you're thinking, okay, that doesn't come into play. But there is a professional softball player on one of the teams.
Oh, wow.
Who's really, really good. Like he pitches like strike every single time. Anytime he decides to swing the bat, it's a home run. Like he won't, they like give him orders not to swing unless there's two people on base because it's not worth it because you only have 3 home runs in a game.
Right. They don't want to waste it. Yeah.
They don't want to waste it. So they're like, if there's not 2 people, like just, put the bat out there.
Stroke a single.
Yeah. But his singles are like singles because he hits a 400-foot rocket off of the fence. Like it never goes more than 8 feet off the ground. Yeah. And he's able to do that and just kind of jog to first. I'm like, yo, man, I need those skills in anything. Like to be that good where you can just pick and choose. That's great.
Sam, what sport are you getting hurt at?
What was the last thing I did that made me? No, I don't know.
Your audio's bad, by the way.
Is it better if I come closer to the microphone like this?
Yeah, that's definitely better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're clearly using a condenser mic.
Well, I'm using it's the computer mic.
Right, which is by condenser, it picks up the whole room.
Yeah. Hold on, I'll turn the fan off, which might help.
I'll also say when it comes to sports in general at this age, and Jason, you probably know as well as I do, every game you get hurt. Every single game.
My shoulder's killing me right now.
Every single game you get hurt.
I didn't do anything to my shoulder and it's killing me.
Right. Every single game you get hurt. It's just a matter of how bad. Like, can you finish the game or can you not finish the game? And as soon as it happens.
Hang on. Is this better?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it better now? Okay. Yeah. That's what I thought was going to happen.
Okay. Yeah. Donald, you say wait till you get to be 55, baby. Actually, we've got a guy on my team who's 67. Now he's terrible.
Oh yeah.
He's awful. But he's 67. He's still getting out there. I'm like, you are my idol.
Props to him.
Yeah.
I've been going to a bluegrass jam in Boston where
you get hurt. A lot of pulled muscles at those bluegrass jams.
Well, so there's one guy that shows up who's like, I think he's 93. And he still can like play the fiddle, which is hard.
And the fiddle, the fiddle is not a sit still instrument. Like you got to be jamming a little bit when you're playing the fiddle.
You got to be doing it. And this guy's 93 years old and plays the fiddle. I'm like, I want whatever sauce you have.
Because he has all the sauce.
A lot of it's bourbon.
If I'm still able to play music at that age, I'm going to be like thrilled. So no, I haven't injured myself recently. I've done a lot more hiking and walking. So hopefully that doesn't kill me anytime soon. I haven't played any softball like since COVID, which really sucks. But if I tried running, I'd probably break a leg.
Yeah.
So that sucks.